Avoiding stress is avoiding fulfillment. You don't want to be in that situation. And actually, that simple idea that avoiding stress is a good strategy causes a lot of problems.
I did have a question, but I'm not sure if it's very high impact, but it was more so just thinking about the students that might have like depression or something, or anxiety, and or even like, ASD or ADHD, and kind of managing those alongside productivity and scheduling and all that.
This is a topic that requires like quite a bit of nuance, really, because I don't want to make any type of generalizations here. So normally, if in the perfect scenario, what I usually like to do is I usually like to have a conversation, confidentially, obviously, with the person, psychologist, therapist. So I've done that a number of times where a student will reach out and say, like, I'm trying to use this stuff, but this is the stuff that's holding me back. And, they're already engaging with a psychologist, which is, first of all, a very, very good first step. Like, I strongly recommend getting a good therapist. And I'll have a conversation with the therapist directly from as a professional to professional, to just make sure everything is kind of aligned, so that we're not stepping on each other's toes. We're making sure that we're sort of on the same page, because often working on like self-development and improvement, it takes up a lot of someone's mind and it puts a lot of pressure on them. And removing that pressure is not necessarily like the best thing, because that could be the thing that actually takes away more pressure overall eventually. But it's also important that, for example, a psychologist is aware of what that pressure kind of involves and what that process looks like, so that they can kind of give them good counseling. In those situations where I've had discussions with them, usually it boils down to the idea of how much pressure and expectation is being placed on this person. For mood and affective disorders, this is sort of like a trend that I see. And again, I don't want to be generalizing, but in a lot of the cases, there is a level of like consequentialism that's placed on this person that is not necessarily in perspective. It's not necessarily accurate, and that can create unnecessary amounts of pressure. And the solution to that I normally recommend, because it's just simply the easiest thing, is to just completely back off from it, and just to not necessarily feel the need to be productive at all. You can have a range of techniques and just pick one that you feel is like, I could probably do that, and just try to do it. And if you can do it, that's good. And if you can't, just, let it go and just try something else. This perspective I have now is very different from what I would have said maybe 3-4 years ago. I used to try to get people to at least do a little bit, have that sort of consistency. But when you are really like in a very, very negative place, you can't do anything, let alone restructuring your schedule. Like, you're not even gonna get out of bed. Why do you need a schedule if you're in bed? Like, 1 o'clock, time to roll over, like you don't need to time manage or prioritize when you're not gonna do anything in that day anyway. But then the idea that, I should be doing something, that just adds to the burden of it. So now I'm in the position where it's like, if you feel like doing something, just pick things up casually, non-committally, just give things a go, because fundamentally the issue here is going to be the other work, the mental health work. That is something that will, potentially will take time and needs to be dealt with by a mental health professional, is what I think in most cases.
Yeah, I think that definitely provides a lot of insight, especially when I have actually seen some students on the course who are dealing with these issues. And, it kind of does really feel like, firstly, get like, maybe see like a professional about this.
I would say mental health cuts at the knees. Like, it doesn't matter how, good someone is at anything, mental health will always cut below that. Yeah. So it just makes everything essentially kind of irrelevant. Obviously I really believe in like learning to learn. And I think it creates a lot of empowerment. Learning to learn is the thing that opens the doors for anyone. It's the thing that gives you opportunity. It's the thing that gives you the power to actually pick your own trajectory in life. Like, that's the key that opens every single door, learning to learn, right? I place learning to learn more important than learning any type of content, any type of subject, any type of domain expertise. It's one of the most important things you can learn. There's not many things I place higher than that, but emotional self-regulation and good mental health and self-care, that takes precedence over all, because the lived human experience is outside of efficiency and productivity, right? None of the stuff that I teach, absolutely none of the stuff that I teach in any form, is even remotely relevant or important in the context of having a life where you are okay with being yourself and being fulfilled and happy because of what you want for your life, not because of some other expectation or the pressure that you place on yourself or any of the other like clouds our judgment. Nothing is more important than just being like, this is who I want to be, I'm happy with who I want to be, and this is the way that I want to live, and not letting anything interfere with that, and having that kind of like, I don't want to call it happiness, because I think the word happiness is a little sometimes overrated in mental health. Yeah, it's like, you don't always have to be happy, it's like that toxic positivity sort of thing. Like, you don't always have to be happy all the time, but at least feeling like this is the way I want to live, and this is the person I want to be, and this is the way that I want to be, and feeling comfortable and secure and safe in that is more important than anything that I teach. And so I would never recommend to prioritize that over something that's going to help with this.
That's very true. And I always think, like, especially in my age range, a lot of it, like a lot of people in this kind of developmental stage are trying to find who they are and trying to, find their own identity. It's actually, I think it's like one of the stages in Erickson's theory, basically trying to figure out who exactly you are. And that process of identity formation is so vital, because without it, you aren't really anything, essentially.
I will add though, like identity formation and like self-formation theory and things. This is a little different though in a way, because yes, it can lead to problems with mental health, but it is not in itself like a mental health process inherently. So like the idea of discovering identity, a lot of that actually comes through experience and pushing yourself. So like a lot of my identity formation came from me pushing myself beyond what a lot of other people do. So I don't necessarily think I don't believe that you should back off from the experience of life to find yourself, because I think a lot of what you find is through the pressures that you put yourself through. You can only discover so much by having a small set of experiences. There's only so much to reflect on. I think that in some cases it would be the opposite when it comes to just that. But obviously if, it's causing a lot of distress, then the solution to that may be to, reevaluate the approach. Actually, for some people, it's the opposite. So I work with a lot of medical students that don't know who they are anymore, because after they enter medical school, they're just hating life. And then they're wondering why. And it's well, maybe you probably shouldn't have done this in the first place. But, at that point, they're sort of lost and empty and they don't know what to do. What I actually recommend for them is that current approach right now is not really working for you. What's your current approach? And a lot of these people are doing absolutely nothing except for just go to uni, study, think about medicine, think about becoming a doctor, hate the thought about it, and then go back to the cycle of doing that every single day. And then they're I hate this, but that's what I'm doing. Who am I? So my solution for those people is just you should do stuff. You need to do more things in that case, right? Because the approach that was working was not doing enough. Right.
Even just on the last point that you were saying there, a lot of busyness that I have is more than I can handle, but it's deliberately put on myself to see how I can grow, because I don't know how much I can achieve, but I want to see that all of the time, because I have absolutely no idea who I am. But as you were saying, for example, if I can try out a lot of different things, then I have tasted a lot of stuff, and then eventually I can choose to specialize in a particular area. I don't know how many more years this is going to take, but I expect it to take quite a while. But I needed to start early. So that's why I do so many things that quite, I guess, atypical for some of my age doing medicine like me. There's maybe one person I know in my medical degree who's doing stuff like I do, but even still, I find it very hard to relate to people doing all of this sort of crazy stuff. But I love it, and
I'm pretty surprised that there are people, that there's someone else in your medical degree that's doing what you're doing.
Well, I feel that I am the influence that has pushed them in that way as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So other than that, there was no one. So I recruited someone.
Yeah, there's a lot of people around me that started picking up side hustles and doing random stuff when they saw me kind of dabbling in things. And you know what? They all loved it. It was all a positive experience, even if they got more stress. The thing is stress is not a bad thing, right? Yep. It can be a good thing. We call it eustress, right? Every medical student knows about eustress. One of the first things you learn is there's de-stress and there's eustress. And not all stress is a bad thing. And in fact, one of the things I talk about is that the path of a fulfilling life actually involves good stress, because we find fulfillment in overcoming challenges that are difficult. You're not going to have something that's difficult that isn't challenging you by definition. And therefore, it's going to put a little bit of stress on.
I think that's one of the first things you kind of told me when I first met you. Back then, I was very concerned about my medical condition influencing my ability to do stuff. And I was very worried. I was, saying oh, what if the pain, associated with my condition makes me unable to do all these things. And because, it's exacerbated by stress, therefore should I avoid stressful things? And I think your answer was essentially, you quoted Nietzsche. You're well, actually, pain in itself and stress in itself can be actually transformative, can actually be a good thing. And anything that is worth pursuing is going to be inherently stressful, because that's how it's actually worth pursuing. And to me, I think that was the first time that I really saw that perspective and really had a change, where now I'm viewing things much more in the lens of, okay, well, even though this is stressful and I'm, right now I'm pretty busy, I work 3 jobs on top of med school and all this other leadership stuff I do within the committees. And, sometimes I just feel maybe I should lighten the load because I'm overwhelmed. But then I always think, well, am I liking the stuff that I'm doing right now? Yes. Is it really stressful at times? Yes. But overall, do I think that, my level of fulfillment and enjoyment in what my life is right now is that maintained? And usually that's also a yes. So I always think, even though there's pain involved, it's kind of usually worth it in the end. It's kind of like this idea of like the eudaimonic like happiness, as opposed to like the more like hedonistic approach that's the thing I always think of.
But the thing is that you don't have to, like, for example, if you're feeling overwhelmed, like you can just, lighten your load. But it is the understanding that stress is not a bad thing inherently, is, the kind of thing. And trying to avoid stress is not, number one, possible. But number two, not strategic, and it's not going to be fulfilling, right? Avoiding stress is avoiding fulfillment. You don't want to be in that situation. And actually, that simple idea that avoiding stress is a good strategy causes a lot of problems, especially with people with anxiety, because you live a life out of fear. Everything you do is you give yourself more stress because you're stressed about encountering stress. And so that becomes a big issue. So, like, I don't necessarily think that, it's true that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Like sometimes what doesn't kill you like permanently disables you and scars you for life beyond recovery. Okay. But like, I think that stress should be viewed in a way that is a little bit more holistic rather than just kind of binary and sort of what it's providing for you. And I think the type of identity you can form from that is in a lot of ways very unique and a lot more meaningful. So for example, like an identity that I formed for myself over the years is that I view myself as a person that performs under pressure. That is not just a skill I have, that is the type of person I see myself as being fundamentally. And so having that actually in itself becomes an attribute that is beneficial for me. So in a way, this formation of the identity that has come from being under pressure becomes an attribute that is almost self-fulfilling. Because I view myself as someone that performs under pressure, when I'm put under pressure, I tend to, behave and act in such a way that enables me to perform under pressure because I see that as the type of person that I am. It's just like how if you're devoutly Christian, you see yourself as someone that goes to church even when you're busy, that prays even when it's difficult, that believes in your faith when you want to give up. Like you engage in behaviors because that is the type of person that you are. And a lot of identities, you don't really get a chance to develop them when you haven't been challenged. So when you are challenged, if you don't have that identity to fall back on, what's going to be there to push you through?
Just to add on to that, like about all that stress as being like a good thing. I've been doing a lot of dabbling in like Eastern philosophy and like school of thinking, and this idea in Sanskrit, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, and it's called Dukkha. And what it's saying is that Dukkha means to stress, to suffer, to be unhappy. And interestingly, when we think about Dukkha holistically, what it's telling us is that to feel these emotions, it's actually to live life. To feel stress, to feel unhappy, and to feel unsatisfied, essentially, that's part of the human condition, essentially. It's like one of your key karmas or something, your karmas or something like that. Because if you can't feel that, right, you can't feel pain, you can't feel suffering, how can you feel like happiness? How do you know what the comparison is like? So right. I think that sort of Eastern philosophy idea really plays in with like everything that we sort of just talked about.
I do want to jump in with my personal experience. So I've never been one to necessarily have like a propensity towards like strong anxiety or strong stress, but definitely when I was like in year 10 and such, I don't know what gave me this idea, but I always thought that the goal was like true hedonic happiness all of the time. That there wasn't this kind of acceptance with the fact that, as you mentioned, Lewis, like there needs to be this human experience with the ups and downs, and it has to be that way in order for there to be happy moments. Otherwise, it's not going to really work because there has to be a baseline. And then even as well with the stress thing, I had always tried to avoid it because I thought, to reach self-actualization, it means to have no stress and to be purely happy. And so, I was fortunate enough to get in contact with a psychologist, even not having any major concerns, but just to prepare myself for that when things get more stressful or I may develop anxiety, I know how to manage these thoughts. And so even just understanding that, having this stress is empowering mindset and understanding that it's all about this acceptance and feeling out those emotions when you feel low and a little blue, that stuff made like a massive difference for me and how I just see the world. So I just wanted to add that in because, I would have never realized these things ever.
Yeah. I think like to summarize is that stress is not the thing that is the problem. It's if stress is bothering you is the problem. And the bothering is actually something that is kind of controllable and is something sort of a perspective. And you can be both stressed and actually fine at the same time, right? You can be like, yep, like right now I'm under stressed. However, I'm okay. It's not bothering me. It's just like, I'm under some stress, you know. It would be an issue if that stress breaks you, that becomes an issue. Or it becomes an issue if you are taking that stress and internalizing it in a way that is beyond what the stressor is placing on you, and you're adding more to it. Or what if, you know, like the consequences of this and getting really anxious because of it. You know, this is, again, like, this is a very philosophical discussion that we're having today, but I always take it back to like cosmic insignificance in a way. For me, I always think at the end of the day, nothing really is going to matter. At the end of the day, like if I zoom out far enough, doesn't really matter. And I think I view my success that way as well, actually, just to, you know, keep things in perspective, is that like, sure, I could, you know, make $100 million and change the world and the way that everyone learns forever, but it's just a blip, you know, it's just a blip in a tiny piece of time in human history. And like for a single species, like at a big enough scale, when you zoom out enough, things don't really matter too much. But if you're really, really, really zoomed in, and that's the only thing that you're thinking about, then everything matters. Like the consequences of everything kind of become a mountain. I don't really know what the initial question for this entire discussion was.
It was just sparked by that depression, anxiety question, and then it just spiraled into this, which I thought was pretty cool. Because, you know, I was thinking like this entire time, you have like a lot of insight and like philosophical knowledge for a study coach, because, you know, I was looking, as I do in the YouTube comment section, sometimes when I get distracted and I see on one of the videos about productivity, a comment that's like, oh, you know, you should just stick to talking about study techniques only, you know, and you shouldn't focus on this like hocus pocus, like productivity mindset thing. Like this is just, you know, not your domain.
It's naive to think that I can't talk about that stuff, because you can't be academically successful, especially not long-term, especially not at a high level, if you don't have good self-management. And I think that a lot of the thing is like, because I challenge a lot of the status quo, I try to get people to like change things about either themselves or their practice. And changing things requires effort and energy. And I think there are some people that are so insecure and unconfident in their ability to successfully change that they know that they aren't going to engage in that change in the first place, and that they avoid that change. So rather than accepting that this change is necessary and good for them and embracing it, because of the fact that they are insecure of failure, they reject the entire concept that that change is worthwhile or necessary, and they externalize that and attack outwards. I think a lot of it comes from not having the courage to actually change yourself and put in that effort and accept that it will be difficult and you might fail, and therefore like rejecting the premise as a whole.
Yeah, it attacks their identity as well, because it's built off of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for joining in on this discussion. This was pretty fun. I don't know how the YouTube audience will find it. Let me know what you think about the discussion in the comments. And thanks to everyone listening for catching up, and we'll see you in the next one.